I'm going to be reading Ranger's Apprentice, The Runes of Gorlan, and it will be chapter 22. Let's get started. Will was in the open meadow behind Halt's cottage, practicing. He had 4 targets set up in different ranges, and all alternating his shots at random between the 4 of them, never firing at the same one twice in a row. Halt had set the exercise for him before, and he had gone to the Baron's office to discuss the dispatch that had come in from the king. "If you fire twice at the same target," he had said, "you'll begin to reply on the first shot to determine your direction and evaluation. That way, you'll never learn to shoot instinctively. You'll always need a sighting shot first." Will knew his teacher was right, but that didn't make the exercise any easier. To add to the difficulty, Halt had stipulated that he should let no more than 5 seconds elapse between each shot. Frowning in concentration, he let the last 5 arrows of a set go, one after the other, in rapid succession. They flashed across the meadow, thudding into the targets. Will, his quiver empty for the 10th time that morning, stopped to survey the results. He nodded in satisfaction. Every arrow had hit a target, and most of them were clustered in the inner ring of the bullseye itself. It was shooting of the exceptionally high quality, and it proved to him of the value of constant practice. He wasn't to know it, of course, but there were already few archers in the kingdom outside of the Ranger Corps who could have matched him. Even the archers in the king's army weren't trained to shoot with such individual speed and accuracy. They were trained to fire as a group, spending a mass of arrows against an attacking force. As a result, their training concentrated more on coordinated action, so that all arrows were fired simultaneously. He had just set the bow down, preparatory to recovering his arrows. Then the sound of a footstep behind him made him turn. He was little surprised that 3 battle school apprentices watching him, their red surcoats making them a second-year trainee, and didn't recognize any of them. But he nodded a friendly greeting. "Good morning," he said. "What brings you down here?" It was unusual to find battle school apprentices this far from the castle. He noted that the thick canes that they all carried, and decided they must have been set out for a walk. The closest of them, a handsome blonde-haired boy, smiled and said, "We're looking for the Ranger's Apprentice." Oh. Will couldn't help smiling in return. After all, the ranger's cloak he wore marked him unmistakably, and as the apprentice ranger. But perhaps the battle school apprentice was only being polite. I had to move to a new place. Okay. Well, you found him, he said. "What can I do for you?" "We've brought a message from the battle school for you," the boy replied. "Look at the battle school trainees." He was tall and well-muscled, as were his companions. They moved closer to him now, and Will instinctively backed off a pace. They were a little too close, he felt, closer than they needed to be to pass on a message. "It's about what happened at the boar hunt," said one of the others. This one was red-headed, with a heavy dusting of freckles, and a nose that showed distinct signs of having been broken. Probably in one of the training combats that battle school students were always practicing. Will shrugged uncomfortably. There was something in the air he did not like. The blond boy was smiling still. But neither, the tallest of the three, looked as if they thought there was anything to smile about. You know, Will said, people are talking a lot of nonsense about that. I didn't do much, we know. The red-headed boy snapped angrily, and again, Will took a pace back as they all moved a little closer. Halt's training was ringing alarm bells in his mind now. Never let people get too close to you, he had told. If they try to, be on the guard, no matter who they are or how friendly you think they look. But when you go swinging around telling everyone you've saved a big, clumsy battle school apprentice, you make us look foolish, the tall boy accused. Will looked at him, frowning. I never said that, he protested. In that moment, while he was distracted by Bryn, Alda made his move, stepping quickly forward with the sack held open to throw it over Will's head. It was the same tactic that he used so successfully with Horace, but Will was already on his guard, and as the other boy moved, he sensed the attack and retaliated. Unexpectedly, he dived forward toward Alda, rolling in a somersault that took him under the sack, then letting his legs sweep around, sighting Alda's legs from under him so that the bigger boy was sent sprawling. But there were three of them, and that was too many for him to keep track of. He evaded Alda and Bryn, but as he rolled to his feet, completing the movement, Jerome brought his cane around in a ringing crack across the back of his shoulders. With a cry of pain and shock, Will staggered forward, and Bryn now brought his cane around and hit him across the side. This is fun. I just keep trying to bully these poor kids. Oh my goodness. Oh, it's a very long chapter. Alda had regained his feet, furious with all the way Will had evaded him, and he struck Will across the point of the shoulder. The pain was excruciating. In a sob of agony, Will dropped to his knees. Instantly, the three battle school apprentices crowed forward, ringing him, trapping him between them, and the heavy canes raised to continue the beating. That's enough. The unexpected voice stopped. Then Will crouched on the ground, waiting for the beating to begin, arms over his head, looking up and saw Horace, bruised and battered, standing a few meters away. He held one of the wooden battle school drill swords in his right hand. One eye was blackened, and there was a trickle of blood running from his lip, but in his eyes there was a look of hatred and sheer determination that for a moment made the three older boys hesitate. Then they realized that there were three of them, and Horace's sword was, after all, no more of a weapon than the canes they'd carried. Forgetting Will for a moment, they fanned out and moved and circled Horace. The heavy cane raised to strike. Baby followed us, said Alda. Baby wants another beating, Jerome agreed. And Baby's going to get it, said Bryn, smiling confidently. But then a yell of fright was torn from his lips as a sudden jarring force slammed against the cane, whipping it from his grasp and sending it spinning to land several meters away. A similar yell to his right told him that the same thing had happened to Jerome. Confused, Bryn looked around to where the two canes laid. With a sinking feeling, he saw that each one was transfixed by a black-shafted arrow. "I think one at a time is fairer, don't you?" said Holt. Bryn and Jerome felt a surge of terror as they looked up to see the grim-faced ranger standing in the shadows 10 meters away, another arrow already knocked to the string of his massive longbow. Only Alda showed any sign of rebellion. "This is battle school business, Ranger," he said, trying to bluster his way through the situation. "You'd best stay out of it." Will, slowly regaining his feet, saw the dark anger that burned deep in Halt's eyes at the arrogant words. For a moment, he almost felt sorry for Alda. When he felt the throbbing pain in his back and shoulders, any thought of sympathy were instantly blotted away out. "Battle school business, is it, Sonny?" Halt said in a dangerously low voice. He moved forward, covering the ground between him and Alda in a few depictably swift, gliding steps. Before Alda knew it, Halt was barely a meter away. Still, the apprentice remained defiant. The dark look on Halt's face was unsettling, but seeing close up, Alda realized that he was a good head taller than the ranger, and his confidence flowed back. All these years, he'd been nervous of the mysterious man who now stood before him. He'd never realized what a punny figure he really was, which was Alda's second mistake of the day. Halt was small, but puny was not a word that entered into it. In addition, Halt had spent a lifetime fighting for more dangerous adversaries than a second-year battle school apprentice. I seemed to notice that there was a ranger apprentice being attacked, Holt was saying softly. "I think that makes it ranger business as well, don't you?" Alda shrugged, confident now that whatever the ranger might do, he could more than handle it. "Make it your business if you like," he said, a sneer entering his voice. "I really don't care, one way or the other." Halt nodded several times, and he digested that speech. Then he replied, "Well then, I think I will make it my business. But I won't be needing this." As he said it, he replaced the arrow in his quiver and lightly tossed the bow to one side, turning away as he did so. Inadvertently, Alda's eyes followed the action, and instantly he felt a searing pain as Halt stamped backward with the edge of his boot, catching the apprentice's foot between arch and ankle and driving into it. As Alda doubled over the clasp his injured foot, the ranger pivoted on his left heel, and his right elbow slammed upward into Alda's nose, jerking him upright again and sending him staggering back, his eyes steaming with the pain. For a second or two, Alda's right sight was blurred by the reflex tears he felt and slight pricking sensation under his chin. As his eyes cleared, he found the ranger's eyes were only a few centimeters from his own. There was no anger there. Instead, there was a look of utter contempt and disregard that was somehow far more frightening. The picking sensation became a little more pronounced, and as he tried to look down, Alda gave a gasp of fear. Halt's larger knife razor edge, the needle pointed as just under his chin, pressing lightly into the soft flesh of his throat. "Don't ever talk to me like that again, boy," the ranger said, so softly that Alda had the strain to hear the words. "And don't ever lay a hand on my apprentice again, understand?" Alda, all his arrogance gone, his heart pounding in terror, could say nothing. The knife pricked a little harder against his throat, and he felt a warm trickle of blood sliding down under his collar. Halt's eyes blazed suddenly, like the coals of fire in the sudden draft. "Understand?" he repeated, and Alda croaked a reply. "Yes, sir." Halt stepped back, sheathing the knife. In one fluid movement, Alda sank to the ground, massaging his injured ankle. He was sure that was damage in the tendons. "Ignore him." Halt turned to face the other two second-year apprentices. Instinctively, they had moved closer together, and they were watching him fearfully, uncertain as what was going to do next. Halt pointed to Bryn. "You," he said, his word edged with contempt. "Pick up your cane." Fearfully, Bryn moved to where the cane lay on the ground, Halt's arrows still embedded halfway along the length. Without taking his eyes off the ranger, fearing some trick, he stood at the knees, his hand scattling awkwardly until it touched the cane. Then he stood again, holding it uncertainly in his left hand. "Now give me back my arrow," the ranger ordered, and the tall, swarthy boy struggled to remove the arrow, stepping close enough to hand it to Halt, tensed in every muscle as he waited for some unexpected move from the ranger. Halt, however, merely took the arrow and replaced it in his quiver. Bryn stepped hurriedly back out of the reach. Halt gave a small, contemptuous laugh. Then he turned to Horace. "I take it these are the three who gave you those bruises?" he asked. Horace said nothing for a moment, then realized that his continued silence was ridiculous. There was no reason why he should shield the three bullies any farther. There never had been a reason. "Yes, sir." "Thank God. Finally telling an adult actually cares." "Wow." "Yes, sir," he said decisively. Holt nodded, rubbing his chin. "I'd rather thought so." He said, "Well then, I've heard rumors that you're pretty good with a sword. How about a practice bout this hero in front of me?" A slow grin spread over Horace's face as he understood what the ranger was suggesting. He started forward. "I think I'd like that." Bryn backed away a pace. "Just a moment," he cried. "You can't expect me to." He got no further. The ranger's eyes glittered with that dangerous light once more, and he took a half step forward, his hand dropping to the hilt of the Saxon knife. "You've got a cane. I suggest you use it. Now get on with it," he ordered, his voice very loud and dangerous. Realizing he was trapped, Bryn turned to face Horace. Now that it was a matter of one-on-one, he felt far less confident with dealing with the younger boy. Everyone had heard of Horace's almost uncanny natural swordsmanship. Deciding that attack might be the best self-defense, Bryn stepped forward and aimed an overhead slash at Horace. Horace parried it easily. He parried Bryn's next two strokes with equal ease. Then He blocked Bryn's fourth stroke. He flicked his wooden blade down the length of the other boy's cane in an instant before two weapons disintegrated. There were no crosspiece to protect Bryn's hands from the movement of the hardwood drill sword slammed painfully into his fingers. With a cry of agony, he dropped with heavy stick, leaping back and wriggling his injured hand painfully under his arm. Horace stood ready to resume. "I didn't hear anybody call stop," Holt said mildly. "But he disarmed me," Bryn whined. Holt smiled at him. "So he has, but I'm sure he'll let you pick up your cane and start again. Go ahead." Bryn looked from Holt to Horace and back again. He saw no pity in either face. "I don't want to," he said in a very small voice. Horace found it hard to recognize the cringing figure of the sneering bully who had been making his life hell for the past few months. Holt appeared to consider Bryn's statement. "We'll note your protest," he said cheerfully. "Now continue, please." Bryn's hand throbbed painfully, but even worse than the pain, the fear of what was to come, the uncertainty that Horace would punish him without mercy. He bent down and reached fearfully for the cane, his eyes fixed on Horace. The younger boy waited patiently until Bryn was ready, then made a sudden feint forward. Bryn yelled in fear and threw the cane aside. Horace shook his head in disgust. "Who's the baby now?" he asked. Bryn wouldn't meet his gaze. He shrank away, his eyes cast down. "If he's going to be a baby," Holt suggested, "I suppose you'll just have to paddle him." If he... A grin spread over Horace's face. He sprang forward and grabbed Bryn by the scruff of his neck, spinning him around. Then he proceeded to whack the older boy's backside with the flat of the drill sword, over and over again, following him around the clearing as Bryn tried to pull away from the remorseless punishment. Bryn howled and humped and sobbed, but Horace's grip was firm on his collar, and there was no escape. Finally, when Horace felt he had repaid all the bullying and insults and the pain that he'd suffered, he'd let go. Bryn staggered away and dropped to his hands and knees, sobbing with pain and fear. Jerome had watched the proceeding in horror, knowing his turn was coming. He began to edge away, hoping to escape while the ranger's attention was distracted. "Take one step, and I'll put an arrow through you." Will tried to muddle his voice on the quiet, threatening tone Holt had used. He had retrieved several of his arrows from the nearest target, and now he had one of them ready, laid on the bowstring. Holt glanced around approvingly. "Good idea," he said. "Aim for the left calf. It's a very painful wound." He glanced over to where Bryn lay sobbing on the ground at Horace's feet. "I think he's had enough," he said. Then he jerked a thumb at Jerome. "Your turn," he said briefly. Horace retrieved the cane that Bryn had dropped and moved toward Jerome, moving it out to him. Jerome backed away. "No," Jerome yelled, wide-eyed. "It's not fair. Well, of course it's not fair," Holt agreed. In his reasonable tone. "I gather you think 3 against 1 is fair? Now, get on with it." Will had often heard the saying that a concerned rat will eventually show fight. Jerome proved it now. He went on to the attack, and to his own surprise, Horace gave ground before the rain of blows aimed at him. The bully's confidence began to grow as he advanced. He failed to notice that Horace was blocking every stroke with ease, almost with contempt. Jerome's best strokes never even looked like they were breaking through Horace's defense. The second-year apprentice might as well have been hitting a stone wall. Then Horace stopped retreating and stood fast, blocking Jerome's latest stroke with an iron wrist. They stood chest to chest for a few seconds, and then Horace began to push Jerome back. His left hand gripped Jerome's right wrist, keeping their weapons locked together. Jerome's feet skidded on the snow as Horace forced him backward, farther and farther. Then he gave a final heave and sent Jerome sprawling on the ground. Jerome had seen what happened to Bryn. He knew that surrender wasn't an option. He scrambled to his feet and defended himself desperately as Horace began his attack. Jerome was driven back by a whirlwind of They stood chest to chest for a few seconds. Horace began to push Jerome back. His left hand gripped Jerome's right wrist, keeping their weapons locked together. Jerome's feet skidded on the snow, and Horace forced him backward farther and farther. Then he gave a final heave and sent Jerome sprawling on the ground. Jerome had seen what happened to Bryn. He knew that surrender wasn't an option. He scrambled to his feet and defended himself desperately as Horace began his own attack. Jerome had driven back by a whirlwind of forehand, backhands, side, and overhead cuts. He managed to block some of the strokes, but the blistered speed of Horace's attack defeated him. Blows rained on his shins, elbows, and shoulders almost at will. Horace seemed to concentrate on the bony spots that would hurt most. Occasionally he used the rounded point of the sword to thrust into Jerome's ribs, just hard enough to bruise without breaking bones. Finally, Jerome had enough. He wheeled away from the onslaught, dropped the cane, and fell to the ground, hands clasped protectively over his head. His backside was raised inevitably in the air, and Horace paused and looked a question at Holt. The ranger made a little gesture toward Jerome. "Why not?" he said. "An opportunity like that doesn't come every day." And even he winced at the thundering kick of the backside that Horace delivered. Jerome's nose down in the wet snow skidded at least a meter from the force of it. Holt retrieved the cane that Jerome had dropped. He studied it for a moment, testing its weight and balance. Really not much of a weapon. You have to wonder why they chose it. Then he tossed the cane to Elda. "Get busy," he ordered. The blond boy, still crouched, nursing his injured ankle, looked at the cane in disbelief. Blood steamed down his face from his shattered nose. He'd never been quite so good-looking again, Will thought. But I'm injured," he protested, hobbling awkwardly on his feet. But he couldn't believe that Holt had required him to go through the punishment he'd just witnessed. Holt paused, studying him as if the fact hadn't occurred to him. For a moment, a ray of hope shone in Alda's mind. So you are, the ranger said. "So you are." He looked a little disappointed, and Alda began to believe that Holt's sense of fair play would spare him a sort of punishment that had been handed to his friends. Then the ranger's face cleared. "But just a minute," he said. "So, is Horace? Isn't that right, Will?" Will grinned. "Definitely, Halt," he said, and Alda's brief hope vanished without a trace. Halt now turned to Horace, asking with mocking concern, "Are you sure you're not too badly injured to continue, Horace?" Horace smiled. It was a smile that never reached his eyes. "Oh, I think I can manage," he said. "Well, that settles it then," Halt said cheerfully. "Let's continue, shall we?" And Alda knew there was no escape from him either. He faced up to Horace, and the final duel began. Alda was the best swordsman of the three bullies, and at least he gave Horace some competition for a few minutes, but they felt each other out with stroke and counterstroke, thrust and parry. He quickly realized that Horace was his master. His only chance, he felt was to try something unexpected. He disengaged, then changed his grip on the cane, holding it in both hands like a quarterstaff and launching a series of rapid left and right hooking blows with it. For a second, Horace was caught by surprise as he fell back, but he recovered with cat-like speed and aimed at an overhead blow at Alda. The second-year student attempted a standard quarterstaff parry, holding the staff at either hand, and so blocked the sword stroke with the middle section. In theory, it was the right tactic. In practice, the hardened hickory jill sword simply sheared through the cane, leaving Alda holding two useless shortened sticks. Usually unnerved, he let them drop and stood defensively before Horace. Horace looked at his longtime tormentor, then at the sword in his hand. "I don't need this," he muttered, and let the sword drop. The right hand, punched when he threw, traveled one more than 20 centimeters in the point of Alda's jaw, but it had his shoulder and body weight and months of suffering and loneliness behind it, the loneliness that only the victim of bullying could know. Will's eyes, widening slightly at Alda, came off his feet and hurtled backwards, and came crashing down in the cold snow beside his two friends. He thought about the time in the past where he had fought with Horace. He'd known that the other boy was capable of throwing a punch like that. He never would have done so. Alda didn't move. Odds were, he didn't move for some time, Will thought. Horace stepped back, shaking his bruised knuckles and waving a sigh of satisfaction. "You have no idea how good that felt," he said. "Thank you, Ranger." Halt nodded acknowledgement. "Thank you for taking a hand when they attacked Will. And by the way, my friends call me Halt." Oh, that's sweet. Okay, that's it for that chapter. It was very long, but good.